If you're a Greek philosophy nerd, you probably know what ethical intellectualism is, and you definitely think it's bullshit, but in this video, I'm gonna save it, and what I'm gonna use to do it is Darwin. Let's make it so. So, if you aren't a Greek philosophy nerd, this is basically what ethical intellectualism is. It's a Socratic doctrine which basically says the following. It says if someone knows what good is, that someone is going to do what is good. Therefore, since some people do not do what is good, there not only there are people who do not know that, but every act of evil that exists does not come from um, malignity or wanting to do evil. It comes from ignorance. It comes from not knowing what good is. For example, you kill a person, you don't do it because you're evil. You actually are doing just what you think is good, and therefore, well, this isn't explicit, but I'd ask, can we really blame someone for murdering someone if this is true? Because the murderer isn't doing something because they're evil, they just think that is right. So, can we really blame someone for being wrong? Isn't that unfair? This is the crazy ethical rabbit hole of ethical intellectualism. And the solution that most people bring to it is simply, but this is total bullshit, which is a fair opinion for reasons you have probably already guessed. Mainly, you are assuming that actions come from reason. In fact, when I say that someone does what he thinks is good, I'm saying that he's doing what rationally he thinks is the philosophical good. Like doing philosophy, he gets something wrong, and so he isn't capable of determining philosophically what good and evil are, and therefore he does the wrong thing. But this is not really how the world works, because most people, when deciding to murder someone, do not make a philosophical argument for why that's supposed to be right. Some people do, and they're wrong, and if they're sincere, which they usually aren't, at that point, that argument does apply. But most critics of this theory just say, but if you murder someone 99.9% of the time, it's because you're emotionally compromised. So you, as a person, are doing something that you rationally know is wrong. Some people, including myself actually, just say if you do something evil, you probably know that's evil, almost certainly, and you are ignoring that rationality because you're suppressing it because you feel forced to suppress it by your own emotions. Or at least this is the argument I would have made the first time I've heard about this theory. And to be clear, I do not think this argument doesn't work. I do think that it's an objection, and I think this objection makes perfect sense. Saying that people do what they rationally think is the right thing is just wrong, because that's not what happens. But if you have listened to this video with attention, you may have noticed that the adverb rationally was added just in a later moment. But in my very first exposition of the theory, I have never used the adverb rationally, and there is a reason for it. Socrates, who is the father of this theory, does not comes but before the development of an actual theory of how human mind works. The first philosopher we know of that said the human mind is made of these parts was Plato, and Plato did that in a pretty inaccurate way, but that was still something. So good job, Plato, you could have done worse. So for Socrates, there wasn't really, in my opinion, the conception of something coming from an emotional part and something coming from a rational part. Of course, we do not have texts by Socrates for the simple reason that he never wrote them. So maybe as Plato thought that that was the case or something. But from what we can see in his theory, it really looks like he thinks that the whole human being is but reason, and he never takes really into account the chance maybe he takes into account the chance, but he never really says or assumes that there are other portions of the human being outside reason, at least in my opinion. And I think this is pretty coherent with how Greek society worked at the time. And this is interesting because it really looks like that Socrates' argument comes from this simple mistake, assuming that a human being, its soul, is basically its reason and there's nothing else, which we know is wrong. If you follow this channel, which you probably don't because no one does, you know that I'm really into Kant, and all of Kant basically is about taking a human being, fucking dissecting him, and fucking dissecting them, and understanding how they're made, what they should do, and what they can do. That's Kant. So if Kant wrote the entire critique of pure reason, understanding how the human mind works, probably that's more complicated than it's just reason. And I think that even Socrates thought that it was more complicated than that, but how he exactly thought that we don't know, because does Socrates even exist? Yeah, historically, probably, I guess, but as a philosopher, he's just a name with some thoughts attached randomly to it, in my opinion. But still, I've not come to the point of this video yet, which is, I think that we can save ethical intellectualism not in the form Socrates built it, that would be anachronistic. It was a lot of time ago, and if philosophy stayed the same for all that time, I think it would be an issue. But I think we can take the idea, put something that a much, much more recent philosopher made, and create an ethical theory which could tell us something interesting. And that much, much more recent philosopher I'm talking about, you've probably read this video title, so you probably know that, is Charles Darwin. What the fuck am I talking about? That's a valid question, and we're gonna come to that. Basically, the point is, Socrates, the problem of ethical intellectualism comes from the human soul not being made by reason only. Maybe I should use the term mind in of soul. I think that the difference is pretty complex, and I don't want to go into that right now. But maybe we are making a mistake assuming that emotions and reason are like two things affecting the actions of the human being. I'll phrase it better. Maybe we're making a mistake assuming that the will of the being is determined by reason and emotions, with those two things being separated. They are distinct, but are they independent from each other? Wait, what if they're actually almost the same thing, but in two different personas? What if emotions and reason aren't as different and polarized as we think of them as? Well, if you dwell with this thought long enough, you get to think it's not that weird. It's not that weird because, well, when you do something emotionally, don't you feel the need to justify it by reason? And can you really say that first you create an emotional decision and then you justify it with reason? Don't the two things go along with each other? Don't you make a decision taking into account both things? And since we know pretty well how human reason works, there are a lot of philosophers who have discussed about that. Kant is just one of them. I'd like to ask, what if we haven't understood emotions yet? What if emotions are philosophically way more complex than we think? Well, I think they are, and I think that if we study them, we get to a point where the answers we get almost build a bridge between them and reason. And I think that the main source for that is Darwin. Because Darwin actually creates, it's the only philosopher I think of who does that, actually creates a coherent and well-structured theory explaining exactly where emotion comes from. And the reason for that, casually, not like psychologically, but like, why do we have emotions? Darwin creates a beautiful theory for that, which is evolution. He basically says If we hadn't emotion, we'd probably die for reasons everyone can understand. Therefore, we have emotions. We have evolved emotions for a reason. That's interesting. Emotions ain't random. Emotions do not bring us away from our goals. Emotions exist to bring us to our goals. Mainly, like not dying, which is a pretty important goal if you think about it. Which now you might say, yeah, of course, but those goals existed in the primitive world, in the natural world. Now, the creation of society, the creation of the police, took the human being as an animal and brought him in an absolutely different world. We ain't in nature anymore in the same way animals are. And that's true. But emotions not only adapt, but the human being isn't an animal who developed a society. The human being is an animal designed to have societies. We are evolved to build societies, to build collectives. That's not random. That's not something that an animal that shouldn't do it actually does, and that's weird. And oh my god, human beings are so unique. That's not how it works. Society is written in our DNA. So the emotions we feel right now, right here, have evolved not for the exact not for the Western world, Western democracies or anything, but they have evolved for human society. And this is human society, so those emotions exist with a goal. Those emotions in distraction from goals, they tell us do that for a reason. They don't tell us the reason though, and that's the difference. That's the point. I think that reason and emotions actually do the same thing. They tell you stuff. Just reason also tells you why. That's the nature of reason, right? Reason tells you, oh yeah, do that stuff, but this way because this. Emotions don't do that. Emotions just they don't even just tell you, they shout at you. While reason is like a teacher telling you, I think you should do that for the following reasons. Emotions are like, I don't know, a random guy on the street shouting to you, be careful, there's a fucking car. While with a teacher, you like talk with him or with her and you try to understand what he's telling to you and you pause and you dwell on the thoughts. If someone on the street shouts to you, there's a fucking car about to hit you, you don't think about that. You don't make a philosophical discourse about that. You fucking like move away. And that's what emotions do. That's how emotions work. But that doesn't mean that what you were told isn't worth listening to, or maybe it is. Surely, when you move away, you ain't as sure of your action as you are when a teacher explains to you why this complex philosophical system tells you to do a certain thing. But still, you do not think you should just ignore it. You don't think that's what you should do for your well being. For emotions, that's the same. If you feel lonely and you feel the urge to be with other people, no one should tell you, oh, that's just emotions, that's irrational, you shouldn't listen to that. And probably no one would if you have decent friends, I hope. Probably people will tell you, well, if you have that urge, you should probably go meet other people. Because, God, you got my point, right? So, emotions, in my opinion, ain't, and I mean, I haven't build this argument by academically, but I think you got my point. Emotions ain't random stuff. Emotions are arguments, reasonable arguments, made implicitly. They're arguments you don't actually hear the points of, but they're still arguments. That's implicit reason. Why? Of course, if I just told you that, that would seem absolutely random and stupid and probably not that believable, or maybe believable but surely not something to trust. But we know why that's the case, and that's Darwin. Darwin gives us a theory that demonstrates why emotions are like this, why emotions are actually implicit reasoning. That's not what Darwin says, that's what I say based on what Darwin says. Basically, Darwin says something, I read it and I say, oh my god, but this, in my opinion, should imply this. Darwin never got to the conclusions I'm exposing right now, but I think this is the bridge between emotions and reasons. Emotion and reason are both built in us as human beings, but reason is an explicit form of thought, while emotions aren't. And by the way, disclaimer, I've used the form reason to intend rational analysis, philosophical analysis, what Socrates thought that composed the whole human being. If I were like making a lecture here somehow, maybe it feel the urge to make a more formal distinction about reason, intellect, sensibility, and also I'd probably make a huge digression about what animals have, because animals have emotions too, but they don't have the kind of reason Socrates was talking about, and this is also the reason why, as Aristotle pointed out, animals can't do science, they can't really do techne either, which is usually translated as in art, but that's more complex than that. But all of this isn't of our concern right now. The point I wanted to make is, and this video is already started to be a little bit too long, so I'll hurry up. The point I wanted to make is there's a bridge between emotions and reason. They ain't two totally separate things. So maybe we can save ethical intellectualism. We can save ethical intellectualism by saying maybe, just maybe, that murderer, if you asked him a philosophical analysis of what he was doing, wouldn't have been capable or sincere in doing so, of giving you a philosophical explanation of why what he was doing was right. Because it wasn't. But in deep in his heart, he thought it was. If he killed someone because he thought that it would have made him feel happier and that happiness was something worth striving about, and all he had in his life was his own well-being, and therefore that was everything that existed from his perspective, and so trying to make it better by killing someone is just like killing an image, because you do not really know that the person feels somehow. You just see his body, you do not see his feelings, while you see yours. You should value them more. Maybe that's what this is not true. This is not a good philosophical argument, but this is what the heart of the murderer was telling him. He didn't realize it. He wasn't capable of expressing that philosophically, because this was an emotion. That emotion was the urge to kill someone. And that's it. He perceived nothing more. He just knew that he wanted, that he felt the urge to kill that person. He didn't have the reasoning or the philosophical constructs needed to make a philosophical argument for why it should be right. And probably even if he tried, and even if he had the categories to do so, he would have failed, because, spoiler alert, murdering people is not right. Hello YouTube, I know you have demonetized me. I don't really care at this point, even because I have like 11 subscribers. Who am I even kidding? But there was something in the heart of that murderer telling him otherwise, and therefore, somewhat, he really did what he thought was right. And so, can we really blame him?